Answered in Kind 65. The architecture of mutuality and the refusal of viciousness. There comes a point in a person's maturation where the appetite for combat dissolves, not because one has been defeated, nor because one has triumphed, but because one has finally discerned that most battles are conducted in arenas built of projection, not perception. In earlier stages of development, opposition feels necessary. Identity hardens through friction. One argues to locate oneself. One defends to feel real. One sharpens language into blades because one's footing is unsure and must be stabilized by force. But eventually, if growth is not abandoned, something more elegant emerges. The capacity to remain open without collapsing. This is not passivity. It is not submission. It is not moral superiority disguised as calm. It is a structural shift in the nervous system, an internal reorganization in which defensiveness is no longer required for coherence. When someone becomes open to revision, accusation loses its teeth. A charge cannot wound what is already willing to examine itself. To accuse someone who is fundamentally corrigible is to swing at air. The strike falls short because there is no rigid wall against which it can land. And yet, this openness must never be confused with tolerance for viciousness. There is a profound distinction between clean emotional expression and dysregulated attack. Anger, when integrated, is not corrosive. It is clarifying. It says, something here matters. It delineates a boundary. It reveals value. It does not seek to maim. It seeks to be understood. Viciousness, by contrast, is anger untethered from responsibility. It is pain that has refused metabolization. It is the attempt to regain internal equilibrium by destabilizing another. And repeated viciousness is not a communication style. It is a pattern. One may remain open to correction. One may invite feedback. One may even welcome the revelation of blind spots. But one need not submit to being fashioned into a psychic punching bag for someone else's unprocessed turmoil. Mutuality is the operative word. In any truly reciprocal exchange, both parties are accountable to the quality of the space they co-create. There is no elevated teacher, no inferior student, no awakened custodian shepherding the dreaming masses. There is only an agreement, sometimes implicit, that we will not weaponize our wounds against one another. When that agreement is broken once, it may be repairable. When it is broken twice, it becomes data. Patterns matter more than promises. It is not punitive to withdraw from repeated dysregulation. It is not sanctimonious to refuse escalation. It is not spiritually immature to protect one's nervous system from environments that reactivate old destabilizations. Quite the contrary. Self-abandonment masquerading as compassion is one of the most pernicious errors of the earnest. To remain in cycles that erode one's internal steadiness under the banner of patience or moral obligation is not virtue, it is regression. There is a stage in growth where the primary task is expansion. One experiments, overextends, speaks excessively, explores conceptual extremities. Expression overflows. Refinement has not yet occurred. Then comes discernment. Expression becomes curated, not suppressed. Language becomes measured, not muted. One no longer floods every available channel with transmission, not because there is less to say, but because articulation itself becomes alchemical. Speech refines the speaker. Dialogue becomes a crucible for precision. The aim is no longer volume, it is integrity, and integrity demands boundaries. One of the most insidious relational patterns is the slow accrual of unspoken grievance. A minor irritation left unvoiced calcifies. Another small misalignment, unaddressed, joins it. Silence becomes a pressure chamber. Eventually, the accumulated resentment erupts, not as a proportionate response to a single event, but as a detonation of all previously repressed material. This is not emotional intelligence. It is deferred volatility. Healthy dynamics require immediacy of articulation. That landed poorly. I felt hurt by that. Can we recalibrate? These are not indictments. They are maintenance. They prevent the corrosion that comes from unexpressed friction. To welcome such statements is to welcome co-regulation. It signals, I am not fragile. I am not defensive. I am willing to examine impact separate from intention. But there remains a threshold. If someone repeatedly chooses vicious expression over regulated articulation, if they claw at perceived slights rather than inquire into them, then the dynamic ceases to be mutually regulating. It becomes asymmetrical. And asymmetry, sustained over time, breeds exhaustion. There is a temptation, especially among those who have cultivated stability, to frame departure as instruction. They must learn the consequences. Yet, the cleanest withdrawal is rarely pedagogical. It is simply protective. I do not participate in repeated dysregulation. No sermon, no moral indictment, no hierarchical positioning, just alignment. Relief often accompanies such departure. Relief is not cruelty. It is the nervous system recognizing the cessation of anticipated threat. Alongside relief, there may be disappointment, the quiet lament that potential was not actualized, that depth was not reciprocated, that a hoped-for parity did not materialize. Both sensations can coexist without contradiction. The aspiration for a relational mirror, one that matches rather than admires, is not vanity. It is structural longing, to be met without pedestal or diminishment, without projection or hostility, without fragile ego or covert competition. This is rare. Such a mirror will not be devoid of anger. It will not be perpetually serene. It will flare occasionally. It will misstep, but it will repair. Repair is the hallmark of maturity. The question, then, is not whether intensity will arise. It inevitably will. The question is whether intensity is weaponized or metabolized. To feel anger and refuse to weaponize it is strength. To receive anger and respond with curiosity rather than defensiveness is strength. To walk away from repeated viciousness without demonizing the other is strength. These are not contradictory capacities. They are components of psychological integration. There is also the matter of expectation. To expect growth from those with whom one engages is not arrogance, it is congruence. If one has labored to hone one's own step, to refine speech, regulate reaction, and abandon the seduction of cruelty, it is not unreasonable to seek companions who are engaged in a comparable enterprise. But expectation must remain supple. Growth is rarely linear. Even the disciplined regress under sufficient stress. The measure is not perfection, it is trajectory. Is there reflection after rupture? Is there accountability without coercion? Is there a willingness to revisit and revise? Where these are absent, departure is not abandonment, it is calibration. At its core, the refusal of viciousness is not about superiority, it is about sovereignty. It is a declaration that one's internal architecture has been too painstakingly reconstructed to permit erosion through repeated assault. It is possible to hold profound respect for others while declining to remain within their storms. It is possible to offer openness without offering access to one's peace. It is possible to remain corrigible without remaining permeable to harm. And perhaps most significantly, it is possible to maintain curiosity in the presence of feedback. When someone says, "That hurt," the mature response is not indignation, it is inquiry. The absence of defensiveness is not weakness. It is evidence that identity is no longer scaffolded by infallibility. To be open to course correction is to be structurally unthreatened by imperfection. Yet, openness does not obligate endurance of hostility. In the end, mutuality is not mystical, It is practical. It is the shared commitment to avoid turning one another into repositories for unresolved pain. It is the agreement that anger will be articulated rather than hurled, that discomfort will be voiced rather than hoarded, that repair will follow rupture rather than pride. Where that agreement is honored, depth can flourish. Where it is not, exit is wisdom. The architecture of mature relating is neither combative nor naive. It is lucid. It recognizes that one cannot wake another through force, nor stabilize another through self-sacrifice. One can only participate where reciprocity exists. And when reciprocity falters beyond repair, one can leave, not in contempt, not in triumph, but in quiet preservation of what it took years to build. To refuse viciousness is not to refuse humanity. It is to insist that humanity evolve beyond its most primitive reflexes. That insistence, embodied rather than proclaimed, is not aggression. It is integrity.